Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Please stand for the national anthem of Barbados. Please be seated, ladies and gentlemen. The Right Reverend Michael Maxwell, Bishop of Barbados, Dean Jeffrey Gibson, Dean of the Cathedral Church of St. Michael and All Angels, and Chairman of the St. Michael's Center for Faith and Action, the Honourable Corey Lane, Member of Parliament for the City of Bridgetown and Minister of State in the Office of the Attorney General, the Very Reverend Dr. Michael Sniffen, Dean of the Cathedral Church of the Incarnation, other staff of the Cathedral of the Incarnation and Mercer School of Theology, the Reverend Dr. Cicely Athill Horsford, Chairman of the Barbados Christian Council, the Archdeacon of Barbados, the Venerable Eric Lynch, the Principal of the Codrington College, the Reverend Dr. Michael Clark, members of the clergy, including the staff of the St. Michael's Cathedral, clergy serving in Bridgetown and other clergy present, representatives of other charities, members of the Parochial Church Council of the Cathedral, trustees of the St. Michael's Center for Faith and Action, members of the media, distinguished ladies and gentlemen all, good evening and welcome to the Courtney Blackman Grand Salle of the Central Bank of Barbados. And we welcome you to the annual Dean's Lecture presented by the St. Michael's Center for Faith and Action in fulfillment of its objectives, the advancement of public education and religion. We are very pleased to see you all this evening for what promises to be an enlightening experience. My name is Deborah King, and I will be your hostess this evening. By way of introduction, the St. Michael's Center for Faith and Action is a ministry of the Cathedral Church of St. Michael and All Angels, and is open to anyone who shares the center's mission, objectives, and goals. We feel very fortunate to have with us for this distinguished lecture, the Very Reverend Dr. Michael Sniffen, Dean of the Cathedral Church of the Incarnation, who will speak on the topic, the spirituality of the city. We most certainly look forward to his presentation and the discussion it is likely to provoke. We will start the evening in the right manner by invoking the blessings of the Almighty. And it is therefore my distinct pleasure to invite to the podium the Reverend Sandra Hazel to lead us in prayer.
The Lord be with you. Let us pray. Almighty God, Creator of the universe, you have created of one flesh and blood all the nations and peoples on this earth, and shown us through Holy Scripture that we are our brothers and sisters' keeper, and that we should love our neighbors as we love ourselves. Guide the peoples of the world into the ways of that peace which is the fruit of justice. Guide their leaders in a search for effective ministry to the poor. In particular, guard the peoples of Barbados. Guide Sandra, our president, Mia, our prime minister, and Michael, our bishop, into thoughts and deeds of righteousness for all to see. For the sake of Jesus Christ, our Lord. Lord Jesus Christ, by taking human flesh, you have shown that you call us all to humility and to care for one another at whatever cost, so that the hungry may be fed, the thirsty given drink, the naked clothed, the stranger and immigrant made welcome, and the housebound and imprisoned visited. Help us to be diligent in obeying your will and example. Show us new and better ways of caring for the weak and vulnerable, particularly children and elderly persons, and those borne down by encounters with the cruelty and greed of others, that at all times their rights and dignity as children of God, for whom you sacrificed your life on the cross, may be respected and safeguarded. Help us always to love them as you have loved us, and help us always to value ourselves without devaluing others. For your name's sake. Amen. O Holy Spirit, without your presence and help, all we do is worth nothing. Guide and prosper all efforts at education and learning, and practical expressions of theological enlightenment, particularly in the work of the St. Michael Center for Faith and Action, that truth and love, charity, morality, and integrity may mark all humanitarian endeavors. Banish all self-willed opinion which may hinder the recognition of your presence and guidance. With the Father and the Son, O Holy Spirit, be with us all at all times. Amen. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. The Lord be with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Reverend Sandra. Ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Sherry-Ann Clark, a trustee of the St. Michael Center for Faith and Action, will now offer words of welcome on behalf of the center.
The Right Reverend Michael St. James Maxwell, Bishop of Barbados and visitor to the St. Michael Center for Faith and Action. the Very Reverend Dr. Jeffrey Gibson, Dean of the Cathedral Church of St. Michael and All Angels, and Chairman of the St. Michael Center for Faith and Action, the Honorable Corey Lane, JP, MP, Member of Parliament for the City of Bridgetown and Minister of State in the Office of the Attorney General, the very Reverend and welcome Dr. Michael Sniffen, Dean of the Cathedral Church of the Incarnation, Long Island, New York, our guest lecturer this evening, and all other staff of the Cathedral of the Incarnation and the Mercer School of Theology, New York, the Reverend Dr. Cicely Athel Horsford, Chairman of the Barbados Christian Council, who should be joining us online, Archdeacon of Barbados, the Venerable Eric Lynch, Principal of Codrington College, the Reverend Dr. Michael Clark, members of the clergy, including staff of the St. Michael's Cathedral, serving in Bridgetown, and other clergy present, representatives of other charities, members of the Parochial Church Council of the Cathedral, fellow trustees of the St. Michael Center for Faith and Action, members of the media, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, all, good evening. So the protocol now having been further established and reinforced, it is my great pleasure to welcome you to the 2023 Annual Dean's Lecture of the St. Michael Center for Faith and Action. It's a particularly sweet pleasure this evening, as it's been 3 years since we've been able to gather in person for the Dean's Lecture. We've all gone through a difficult period in the pandemic. We managed to do different things in different spaces, but it's always a pleasure to have the energy and the human connection of gathering together in person. So it's a real pleasure to be here together, and thanks to all of you who made the effort to come out. This lecture is one of the, what we would call the set piece events of the St. Michael Center for Faith and Action. And it speaks to the vision of our chairman and dean. It also speaks to one of the core objectives of the center around promoting public education and trying to promote thinking and action in the space where religion meets policy, where church meets society, where politics meets the pulpit, all of these good things. Our topic tonight, the spirituality of the city, is a great backdrop for us to sort of paint the colors of the different elements of the work of the center and the work that we have together as a nation and as a church. It draws together several themes. As a nation, as we come out of COVID, as we rebuild, as we look forward as a new republic, one of the planks of that is the regeneration of the city as a space for economic development, the city as a cultural space, the city as a space for social action, social work, preventing violence, building community cohesion, supporting lives and livelihoods and quality of life in the city. I have a very personal affinity with the city. My mother was born and raised in Mahogany Lane, and I've only ever attended church or urban churches. I grew up, my mother was raised at the Cathedral Church. I grew up in All Souls Church, not so far, just down Bank Hall. And I'm currently a member of St. Leonard's Church right there, Westbury Road. So I've got legitimate roots in the city, right? So there's a lot of vision, there's a lot of excitement about the city. But as we look at that space, urban spaces are complex spaces, but they're also spaces where lots of people gather, where there's a lot of opportunity for ministry, opportunity for good, opportunity for bad. And our lecture here tonight gives us the opportunity, even as we think ahead about development plans, to invite the spiritual element into the conversation, to think about the city. What is the spirituality of the city? What's the space for ministry? What's the space? What is God's space there? How do God's people work there? How do we minister to others? And as we think also about the work of the center, again, this topic and this space gives an opportunity. Obviously, the Cathedral is the ultimate urban church, an urban ministry, which is both a ministry to the city, but a ministry to the nation. And there's the objectives of the center, as we mentioned, are around advancing public education and the promotion of purposes beneficial to the community and the relief of poverty. It's all here in the city. The opportunity to respond to human need, the opportunity to think as we frame policy about the whole person and the spiritual element and the moral dimension to the work that we do and the objectives that we have. So as with that backdrop, we look forward to exciting, a stimulating, thought-provoking evening together. We hope that we not only stimulate thought, but also start to identify some practical actions that we can take forward to advance the objectives to the benefit of the people of the city and of the nation, and to advance God's mission in this part of the vineyard. So that is engage, participate, reflect, and most importantly, act. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Clark, for that excellent start to the evening. We now invite to the podium the Dean of St. Michael's Cathedral, the Very Reverend Dr. Jeffrey D. Gibson, for his opening remarks.
Thank you. The Right Reverend Michael Maxwell, Bishop of Barbados and visitor to the St. Michael Center for Faith and Action. The Honorable Corey Lane, JP MP, Member of Parliament for the City of Bridgetown, Minister of State in the Office of the Attorney General. The Very Reverend Dr. Michael Sniffen, Dean of the Cathedral Church of the Incarnation, Long Island, New York, our guest lecturer. Other staff of the Cathedral of the Incarnation and the Mercer School of Theology. The Reverend Dr. Cicely Athel Horsford, Chairman of the Barbados Christian Council. Archdeacon of Barbados, the Venerable Eric Lynch. The Principal of Cathedral College, the Reverend Dr. Michael Clark. Members of the clergy, including the staff of the Cathedral, my colleagues, clergy serving in Bridgetown and other clergy present, representatives of other charities, members of the Parochial Church Council of the Cathedral, fellow trustees of the St. Michael Center, members of the media, distinguished ladies and gentlemen all. It is a great joy of mine to extend cordial greetings to everyone and to see our nice, lovely, smiling faces in person. And I trust that those who are online are similarly smiling for the occasion that we have tonight. I'm delighted to have this opportunity to make a few remarks as we gather in person and online for the 5th Annual Dean's Lecture, an important feature in the Center's calendar. When the St. Michael Center for Faith and Action was established in 2017, the Board of Trustees pledged to make a contribution to public discourse on matters affecting national life. We have been consistent in our effort, but like most institutions and agencies, the Center's work was affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. There was no public lecture in the year 2021. However, adjustments were made and we were able to present a lecture in last year in 2022 when the lecture was presented online by the Dean of Trinidad and Tobago. I'm thankful that many of you have come here to share and persons have joined online on this occasion, when I'm certain each one of us could be doing something else differently. You have taken the time out to attend the lecture in person or online, and I believe that your time will be well spent and will contribute significantly to the visioning for our nation, for our church, and indeed the region and perhaps the world. At the launch of the center, I indicated that part of the work of any cathedral, in keeping with the ancient tradition of cathedrals, is for there to be opportunities for public discourse. And the center pledged itself to that particular mission. We have endeavored to fulfill that role, where moral deliberation, informed research, serve to promote understanding and possible better way of people relating to each other and serving to enhance the individual's worth and sense of belonging to a community. Our deliberations should therefore help us to shape and influence how we live, how we have our move and have our being, and perhaps help us to influence public policy. It is my expectation that tonight's lecture will fit neatly into that vision. And perhaps it seems this topic chosen by my partner, Dean, is very timely in light of what I heard a few weeks ago in the Parliament of Barbados. Some may even think that it was divinely inspired, because at a time when the city of Bridgetown was getting national focus in terms of politics, commerce, and economics, here it is, the church's institution is saying that we are prepared to take the city on board and pay attention to its spirituality. While increasing expectations of what Bridgetown would look like in a few years are there, in terms of its landscape, the question of its spiritual life can never be overlooked. Towards that end, I'm looking forward to hearing from Dean Sniffen, because I believe he is well equipped, training theologically, and from a point of view of experience, to give us some insights as to how we can navigate further. I believe his perspectives will be influenced by the tradition of the faith we share, because there's a rich heritage of the city in the life of Christian thinking and Christian theology. The spiritual traditions associated with the city are rich and varied. Dean Sniffen has practiced ministry in cities, and I have no doubt that he has given it significant study and thought. I've had my own opportunities to get glimpses of what he's been doing elsewhere, and I am prepared to sit and to hear how he should challenge us, not only for the people of Bridgetown, but I'm certain the cities of the region, indeed the cities of the world. However, I shall not preempt his contribution or that of any other person. And all that is left for me now to do is to hand back over to our distinguished hostess, who will carry on the proceedings. Madam, I thank you. Thank you.
We thank you, Dean Gibson. Ladies and gentlemen, it is now my pleasure to welcome to the podium my dear friend, Ms. Ella Hoyas, who will introduce tonight's guest speaker. Ella?
Thank you very much, Madam Mistress of Ceremonies. The Right Reverend Michael Maxwell, Bishop of Barbados. The Reverend Dr. Jeffrey Gibson, Dean of the Cathedral Church of St. Michael and All Angels and Chairman of the St. Michael Center for Faith and Action. The Honorable Corey Lane, Member of Parliament for the City of Bridgetown and Minister of State in the Office of the Attorney General. The Very Reverend Dr. Michael Sniffen, other staff of the Cathedral Church of the Incarnation and Mercer School of Theology, New York. The Reverend Dr. Cicely Athel Horsford, Chairman of the Barbados Christian Council. The Archdeacon of Barbados, the Venerable Eric Lynch, the Principal of the Codrington College, the Very Reverend Dr. Michael Clark, members of the clergy, including the staff of St. Michael's Cathedral, clergy serving in Bridgetown, and other clergy present, representatives of other charities, members of the Parochial Church Council of the Cathedral, trustees of the St. Michael Center for Faith and Action, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, all, good evening. I have the distinct pleasure this evening to introduce our guest speaker. The Very Reverend Michael T. Sniffen is Dean of the Cathedral of the Incarnation, Long Island. He serves concurrently as Dean of the Mercer School of Theology. For the past 20 years, chaplaincy has been at the heart of his ministry in both parochial and institutional settings. He is a co-founder of the Center for Spiritual Imagination, which reimagines ancient Christian contemplative practices for the 21st century. He is active in chaplaincies at the Nassau County Jail, on 2 college campuses, and on the street. As a naval officer, he serves as chaplain to the 6th Communication Battalion, Force Headquarters Group, United States Marine Corps. Dean Sniffen served as a chaplain to Integrity USA for 3 successive general conventions beginning in 2012. He served with Operation Democracy as a chaplain for the 70th and 75th anniversaries of D-Day in Normandy. He was a steward of the 2008 Lambeth Conference of Bishops. Dean Sniffen is committed to building beloved community wherever he serves. A founding member of the Racial Justice Advisory Council of the Brooklyn Community Foundation, he has also served on the task forces for strategic visioning and racial justice in the Episcopal Diocese of Long Island. He has served as Vice President of Episcopal Response for AIDS, a founding member of Drew's University Diversity Training Committee, and as a member of the President's DACA Task Force at Adelphi University. Following Superstorm Sandy in 2012, he led his parish in establishing a major disaster relief hub that trained over 60,000 volunteers. The effort was hailed by the Department of Homeland Security as one of the most effective grassroots disaster responses in the history of the United States. For the impact of his ministry on the public good, Dean Sniffen has received commendations from the Congress, the City of New York, the Borough of Brooklyn, the New York State Attorney General, and others. In 2011, he was honored with a Luce Fellowship at the Center for Christianity in Global Contexts. In 2019, he received the Frederick Buechner Award for Excellence in Preaching. And in 2022, he was awarded the Military Outstanding Volunteer Service Medal for his service to frontline hospital workers during the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. Dean Sniffen holds a Bachelor of Arts degree, magna cum laude, from West Virginia Wesleyan College, as well as Master of Divinity, Master of Philosophy, and Doctor of Philosophy degrees from Drew University. When not on their sailboat, he and his wife, Joanna, live on the Cathedral Close in Garden City, New York, with their two whippets, Huck and Burley. It is my pleasure to invite Dean Sniffen to address you. Dean Sniffen.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm honored and delighted to be here, and indeed very excited for our time together. To Bishop Michael and Dean Jeffrey, thank you so much for having me here in the diocese and at the cathedral. And to Principal Clark, thank you so much for hosting me and co-founders of the Center for Spiritual Imagination and others from the cathedral at Codrington College for these past 3 days in which we've been spending 4 hours a day in dialogue about the future of spiritual formation in the Anglican tradition. This has been a very rich visit to Barbados, but I'm particularly excited about our time together in conversation because I have a deep and abiding love of and for cities and what they have to teach us about the nature of our faith and its engagement in public life. I don't have a protocol sheet, so I'm not going to list off all of the people to be welcomed, but you have done that well and fully and truly. So I'll just say that I'm delighted to be with you, and I look forward to Q&A afterwards and informal conversation at the reception to follow. Also, I suppose I should make a commercial that I will also be at the cathedral this Sunday as preacher. And so if you'd like to come back, I won't be talking about cities on Sunday, but would love to have a time to greet you before or following worship. Just a few more words before I begin about how this talk fits into our time together here in Barbados over the week. I mentioned that 2 of my colleagues who are co-founders of the Center for Spiritual Imagination are here, Father Adam Bucco and Ms. Chris Vieira. And our center's work very much comes out of experiences that each of us has had individually and collectively in talking with young people about their desire for a more committed and accountable life of faith. And many of these people we have encountered either live in cities or are deeply connected to cities through their work. And so I think the groundwork for what I'm going to say tonight has largely come out of that cathedral ministry. I also want to say that the city I'll be talking about mostly tonight is my own city, New York, and specifically Brooklyn, which is not the sea city in my diocese. In my diocese, the sea city is Garden City. That is the place from which the Bishop of Long Island administers the mission and ministry of our jurisdiction, but it is by no means the largest city. I talked a little bit about island ministries the last time I was here in Barbados. Is anyone here familiar with Long Island, or does anyone here have family or friends in Brooklyn or Queens? Just by show of hands. That's more than half, So you're familiar. Long Island is exactly as described. It's long and thin. It's over 100 miles long, but it's only about 20 miles north to south. And the bulk of our population is in the city of New York, in the boroughs of Brooklyn and Queens. Brooklyn alone has over 2.5 million residents. So the joke between the Bishop of Long Island and the Bishop of New York is that the Bishop of New York may have New York in his title, but the Bishop of Long Island is the Bishop of more New Yorkers. Most New Yorkers live in the Diocese of Long Island. So I take as my scriptural inspiration for what I'm going to share Matthew 23, verse 37. And this may sound familiar to you, especially in this season of Lent. Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often have I desired to gather your children together, just as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you are not willing. It seems to me that contained in this passage is a sense of Christ's own deep and abiding love for the people of the city. And there are overtones yet that even as he turns his face toward Jerusalem on the journey of the cross, also of invoking the New Jerusalem, which comes down out of heaven, prepared for us to inhabit as a beloved city. The blessings and the challenges of urban life, all there as we come to the holiest week of the Christian year and as Jesus and his disciples enter the city. For as we know, whether it's Bridgetown or Brooklyn or Jerusalem, cities are built environments. Yes, we often associate them with their iconic structures and buildings, but they are also human communities. They're places of commerce and art and religion and governance and hospitality and recreation. And they're also places where the challenges that face the human community are easier to see than in other types of community. Poverty is visible in the city in a particular way. Through homelessness, obvious drug use and addiction, visible sex workers outside waiting to be picked up, environmental decay, architectural decay. All of these things are visible in cities in ways that they are often more hidden in village life or coastal life. Cities have their own unique and distinct energy that is different from village life. A city is a place often for us as a place to flee or a place to converge. And in my context, thinking particularly about the portion of New York City that I'm mostly familiar with, it is now a place where the younger generations are returning after their parents and grandparents left the city to get away from the problems that faced their generations. They're discovering, these younger generations, the gift of urban community, not as better than, but as distinct from village or town or rural life. Tonight, the bulk of my time will be given to something that we refer to in our Center for Spiritual Imagination as spiritual autobiography. I want to tell you about how my city taught me to be a better human being and a better priest. And I hope that it will bring to your imagination ways in which your city might teach you things that you need to know about the ministry to which God is calling you as well. The city for me has been a place of divine inspiration and revelation, but it's not a place that I came from as a young person. I grew up in a small fishing village, a place called Bayville on Long Island on the north coast, a bit out from the city. And I am the son and grandson of commercial fishermen. So the place that I knew and grew up in as a human community was one of those places on Long Island that still had dirt roads. We walked around mostly barefoot, and the joke about children who grew up in my village was they said we had Bayville feet, which meant we could walk on broken glass without being cut. Because we spent most of our time walking on beaches and dirt roads, and we had developed calluses on our feet. So that was the context of my life of faith and my understanding of the intimacy of human community growing up. And then when I left my small town to be educated and go to college, I went to a different rural environment. I moved to the mountains of West Virginia, not to be confused with Western Virginia. It's a whole different state, West Virginia, and an interesting place because in our own American Civil War, it was one of the states that was divided between the North and the South. It's a place that wrestled with the nature of human community and the frictions that develop, particularly in times of conflict. And so during my years as a college student, I was far away in the mountains, close to rivers and creatures, with lots of time to contemplate in natural environments. And I had really had very limited experience of what it meant to spend time in an urban environment. It wasn't until after my curacy, when I was called to serve as priest in charge and later rector of one of our diocesan urban parishes called St. Luke and St. Matthew in Brooklyn, in a neighborhood called Clinton Hill, that I really discovered many things I didn't know about the nature of life in a place where your proximity to other human beings means that you must deal with each other. You can't put a field between you and your neighbor. It wasn't like the quite affluent town in which I served my curacy, where an elder priest said to me when I came there, he said, "Father, take note of the height of the hedges in this community. It's not an accident. Neighbors are not interested in seeing one another. They want their space and their privacy." That's quite different from an urban environment in which, in order to have any space at all, we probably need to live and move outside the dwelling place that contains our bedroom and kitchen. You know, we live in small apartments, and when we come out to encounter other people, it's in public spaces. It's in parks. It's in places where we go to buy fruit or to buy food. So when I arrived at St. Luke and St. Matthew, this first time living in an urban environment, I wasn't sure how I was going to sleep at night. The sound of cars, the sound of trains. I could also hear the horns of ships because I wasn't that far from the harbor. And I thought, how will I ever endure this experience? I wasn't worried about thriving or learning anything. I just wanted to know how I was going to survive the city. I wasn't sure the city had anything to teach me. And interestingly enough, those of you who live or have lived in the city or move back and forth between rural environments and urban environments may find that when you're in a place that is completely devoid of sound, that is quiet, when you have become accustomed to the sound of traffic, the sound of crowds, the sound of people leaving bars at 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning, that you can't sleep to the sound of crickets and doves. That's an experience I had when I moved from the city to the Cathedral Close, which is surrounded by 30 acres of open green space. Felt like moving back to a rural environment. Being at St. Luke and St. Matthew, not only being surrounded by that and myself living in an urban environment, also taught me that the community will teach you about its needs and will help you discover what a faithful response to those needs rooted in our own religious tradition might be if only we'll listen. And that congregation taught me how to listen to community in a particular way. Partly, they educated me very early in my time that I needed to attend things like the Police Community Youth Precinct Council, that I needed to attend things like local community board meetings where they were going to be talking about architectural regulations, changes in housing law, etc. These were not things I was told in seminary I would need to attend as a local rector. I thought that perhaps a warden or a vestry person might do that. But my congregation was telling me, no, in order to make these meetings part of the sacred work that we undertake in the city, it is important to have the presence of clergy and ministers at the table where these things are being conversed. And the cultural differences between your city here in Bridgetown and my city in Brooklyn are quite distinct. The separation of church and state as understood in your country now and your country only a few years ago may be changing. In my context, there has long been a sensed division especially in urban areas, that the clergy should relegate their opinions and participation to certain issues facing the city and stay out of others. The difference in my context in New York is largely between what we would understand there as the white church and the black church. That there's been a long tradition in the black church in the United States that clergy are always a part of those conversations. That is, it is an expectation of their congregations that the clergy weigh in on these critical matters facing urban communities. But largely among Anglicans, the kind of white colonial influenced church in that area, these are conversations from which the church often sat out. My congregation taught me how to step up. And while all of that was happening, a youth movement began to emerge, not from my congregation and not in my borough. It was across the river in Manhattan. And it was a movement that you may have heard of here in Barbados called the Occupy movement. Do you remember hearing about that? This is many years ago now. It was an economic justice movement largely undertaken by young people and students in New York, but also throughout the country. And their slogan was, "We are the 99%. That they had that on t-shirts and placards, and it's what they were talking about. The point they were making is that the economic resources in my country are largely held by 1% of the population. And the rest of the 99% of the country does not have the same sort of access to the levers of power, particularly in urban environments." And they were calling for a revolution of economic justice in the country. And it became quite heated. And it became known as the Occupy movement because they moved into a public park not far from Wall Street and a very significant parish in the Diocese of New York called Trinity Wall Street. Many people know Trinity Wall Street because it funds Anglican ministry throughout the communion. And so there was this encampment of young people, and a number of us clergy started going down there out of curiosity. What was going on here? There seemed to be so much energy among these young people for dramatic change at the institutional level so that they felt that they might be able to live with more dignity and bring their children up with more dignity than they had experienced. And I went over there out of curiosity, and I became convicted by what they were doing. I was listening to them, I was observing some of their protests, and it suddenly struck me that what they're calling for sounds to me like the book of Acts. They want things to be held more in common. They want there to be an understanding of each according to their need, rather than all of the power and privilege being maintained by a small group of persons at the top. And so I became, not in a formal sense, but in an informal sense, a chaplain along the periphery of that movement. And little by little, those young people asked me to speak in different venues. And so I would talk from scripture and about our faith and what we see as the economic justice that Jesus calls for. As the movement unfolded, there were some acts of civil disobedience that took place, blocking streets that were not allowed to be blocked, entering properties that were not allowed to be entered. And I was one of a number of clergy, along with, at the time, the retired Bishop of the Armed Forces of the Episcopal Church, who were arrested with a number of these young protesters and activists. And it was after that, we spent just a short amount of time in jail together, and came out that my, it's okay to laugh. We were released on our own recognizance, but it was after that that my wardens and vestry said, "Father Michael, this is precisely what we want you to be doing as our parish priest. And the vestry has decided to create a bail fund in case we need it. Because this is I mean, I just love the very name of the center that has come out of the vision of your dean and your board here, Center for Faith and Action. What they were teaching me as a priest is that when there is a gap between faith and action, It's very easy for our people to think that faith is all about talk and not about deeds. What we all know from those of us who have been parents or who are raising children now or who have ever been parented, that people take much more by what we do than from what we say. And my congregation, when they saw this, in my opinion, small transgressive action that I was willing to take, to be arrested with a group of students to show them that the church is in solidarity with their work for economic justice, that my congregation rose to the occasion in a powerful way and encouraged me on my way. It would have been very hard if I had come back and my vestry had said, we think you better spend more time occupying your office than occupying the street. But what the Spirit did in that congregation was they created a new moment for us. And what it led to was extraordinary. After the Occupy movement had moved on from that phase and many of these students had gone back to their home cities, not long thereafter, there was a significant hurricane further south that was still a superstorm when it hit New York, and that was Superstorm Sandy. And it devastated many of the low-lying areas of our city, particularly in Brooklyn and Queens. And as you will know from Bridgetown, because this is true in cities across the world, when environmental destruction hits, whether it's a storm or the ongoing effects of climate change, who does it hit first? The poorest among us, those with the least access to resources, those with the least access to those in power, those with the least education, those with the least skills to advocate for their own needs. And that's precisely what happened in Brooklyn, where I was serving as a parish priest. There were whole high-rise apartment buildings in the south part of Brooklyn that were completely inundated with floodwater. They had no power. And so just imagine senior citizens living on the 13th floor with mobility issues, no elevators. The bathrooms don't work because there's no electricity, no access to their medications. It was like medieval times. People were going to the bathroom in buckets and dumping it out the windows. There were people struggling with illnesses like diabetes who didn't have access to medications that they desperately needed. It was creating a massive health crisis. And so here I was as a parish priest in a congregation that was not particularly large. We had this Occupy experience together. And so we sat and said, what can we do in response to the abject need of our neighbors in this borough that we love? And of course, our immediate ideas were typical churchy ideas, I would say. Very faithful, but far too narrow in scope. And nowhere near approaching the kind of structural reforms that might lead to an ongoing circumstance in our city where these injustices might not be experienced during the next environmental disaster. So, the ideas were, well, we hear people need socks, so let's collect socks, and people need undergarments, they can't shower, let's collect those. And we could see right away where this was going to go. It was going to be a pretty typical act of charity on the part of our parish. We would collect some things, probably put them around the baptismal font very elegantly on a Sunday, bless them, give them away, and then pat ourselves on the back for doing as much as we could. And that has been many of our experiences, clergy and laity, in parish ministry. We feel we do as much as we can and that the limits are not very far out. And then it struck a member of the vestry that why don't we talk to these students who were so inspiring during the Occupy movement and see what ideas they might have in response to this natural disaster. And we did precisely that. We talked with some of these students, and lo and behold, they had all sorts of what I would consider holy and inspired ideas that had not occurred to us and that we would never have had the particular expertise to carry out. And what they asked for, so we said to them, what do you need from our church in order to help? And they said, well, we really just need some space. And we had space. Our parish building, although the congregation was not big, our parish building was enormous. It was an entire city block. The worship space itself, the nave seated about 1,600 people. That's why when we were worshiping in there, we felt like peas in a drum on Sunday morning. There were not 1,600 of us. But we decided they could have kind of the back third of the nave to do some organizing and collect some items and discover what to do. Well, within about 24 hours of the presence of these students, they said, we're going to need a little more space. We're going to need a little more space. We're going to need a little more space. Until 3 days later, we had dedicated the entire church to hurricane relief efforts, both the training of volunteers, the collection of needed items, et cetera. And I want to just paint a picture for you of what this became. One of the volunteers, who was a young student, had an idea that had never been used at that point. Now it's been utilized several times and around the world. He said, you know, if we're only going to collect items from right here in this borough, we're never going to get what we need, because the resources of this community that has been hit by the storm are already taxed. And people are already dealing with their own trauma from the storm, in addition to needing to respond to each other's needs. We need to be able to reach out all around the country and potentially the world. And he said, I had an idea. You know, Amazon has a function called a bridal registry. You know, where couples that are getting married can go onto Amazon and they can register for things that they want. You know, a blender, a cheese grater, a new duvet. What if we were able to utilize that Amazon ability to register for the items that families devastated by this storm need, and then we could use the church address and they could be delivered here. I said, oh, that would be a really good idea. That's something the church could do. We have an address. We can offer that. Okay, great. Not considering at all what it would become. They ended up raising millions of dollars worth of items through the Amazon registry. And at the height of this effort, we had between 9 and 12 delivery trucks a day arriving at the parish with everything from diapers to space heaters to diesel generators. And we turned the entire nave into what the students named the Holy Warehouse. And they even created aisles using pews of what these things are doing. And then they were sending out fleets of students in rubber boots and hip waders down into these areas to canvass and knock on doors and ask families, what is it that you need? Who lives in this household? And these students were creating these extraordinary online spreadsheets, et cetera. Within a few days of that happening, the Red Cross, the Department of Homeland Security, and also the National Guard of the state of New York were coming to our parish church and saying, can you teach us how to do what you're doing here? How did you organize this? And it seemed like a joke at the time, but I was completely serious about it. I said to them, let me explain to you, it won't take me long to explain to you how we organized this. I inserted my key into the door of the church. I turned it to the left. And I said to this city, come and use my church to help your neighbors recover from this storm. It was a ministry of hospitality. I was not the architect of it. My wardens in vestry were not the architect of it. I would say, reflecting on it theologically, it was only the Holy Spirit that could reveal to a community that it had all of the resources it needed to live a life leading towards justice that was totally inspirational. At the time, we were invited to speak on every show, you know, across the country. All sorts of newspapers were writing about this. And the fact that it happened in a church building was not an accident. It was a part of that commitment to faith and justice in which the city itself, its built environment, its natural environment, and its human community will reveal to us, if we exhibit the curiosity and the openness, the solutions to what challenges it. Towards the end of this relief effort, which went on for months, we had something happen in the parish that rocked us yet again. A number of volunteers were sleeping in the church building. Some of those volunteers were members of the armed forces who had recently returned from Iraq and Afghanistan and were dealing with symptoms of PTSD. And when they showed up as volunteers, I had said to them at the time, I think really you've just returned from war. I think it might be better for you to go back to your families. They're waiting for you. And they said to me, no, you don't understand where we are in our processing of our own grief from war. Being here and participating in relief feels like the operational tempo of warfare. And if we can keep ourselves moving long enough for our spirits to settle back down in, we'll be prepared to re-enter our families. That was an intuition I did not have as a pastor. And I was very nervous about people coming back shell-shocked from war and not yet living back with their families to be working in our church and living in our church. They were sleeping in the balcony of the church. They became some of the primary animating volunteers that we had. And as it would happen, towards the end of this relief effort, an arsonist set our church on fire. It turned out to be religiously motivated. What they did was they had pulled together some very conservative evangelical Christian tracts about lifestyle and other things, and they had poured gasoline on them and lit them on fire on the porch of the church. In part because we had attracted attention that our community was deeply engaged with the fullness of the life of the city, and that we did not see it as the role of our parish to judge the city, but to be in solidarity with the city, the human community that inhabited those buildings, and to discover together what God was calling us to be. It was those volunteers who had returned from war, who were sleeping in the balcony, who saved the church. Our church was very old. We did not have a lot of money, so we had no fire suppression system, no appropriate smoke detection. If they had not been sleeping in the balcony, the church would have burned to the ground. So to me, I'm sure that you can hear in this story my encouragement in terms of engaging the spirituality of the city is that we as church people, I think, often get stuck in wanting to do things to people or wanting to do things for people, right? That the city has problems, the church is going to help solve them, right? Or the city has problematic people, we're going to convert them. I faced this at a big public breakfast in the borough of Brooklyn when I was there. The borough president got up right ahead of me. His name was Marty Markowitz. He had a very funny accent. I'll try and do it for you. He used to say, "Brooklyn is the greatest city in the world." And he talked like that about everything. And so he got up right before I was going to give the invocation for all of the politicians in Brooklyn in the aftermath of this storm. And the borough president said, "Brooklyn, some of us need help, some of us can help, and that's what it's all about. Here's the rector of St. Luke and St. Matthew." And I got up and I said, I'm very honored to follow the borough president, Marty Markowitz, but I couldn't disagree with him more. And those who know my ministry back home know that's how I roll. Couldn't disagree with you more. Brooklyn is a place where everyone needs help and everyone can help. The church has a vocation in these places not to see problems as two-sided, that someone's wrong and someone's right, that someone needs something and someone has something. We need to develop a sense of the giftedness of all of us, that all of us need help and all of us have something to offer. That's what we talk about at home as the shift from charity to solidarity. That too much of the church's life has been characterized by making drops in the bucket and then congratulating ourselves for doing something. Rather, if we spend our time and energies being at the tables in which decisions are made about the very nature of our human communities, whether they be urban or otherwise, and then partnering together with people wherever they are with the purpose of saying, just as we were told in Scripture that God will never leave us or forsake us, the church will never leave you or forsake you when we're talking to the community in which we find ourselves. So, as Jesus turns his face towards Jerusalem, the city that stones its prophets and those sent to it with good news, he also invokes the New Jerusalem, the city in which all of us will dwell in peace lit by the Lamb who is on the throne. Yes, when we deal with the realities of the city, we face a lot of challenges. We might even say the city can be sometimes a place of crucifixion, but it is also the place of resurrection. The two are both true. We're invited not to turn away from the challenge of these complexities that we often don't understand, but to move more deeply and faithfully into them, addressing our common challenges. And we will find, I promise you, that the city will teach us how to be holier people, if only we will listen. Let us turn our faces toward Jerusalem and the New Jerusalem, fearing not, but having faith to act.
Thank you very much, Dean Sniffen. Ladies and gentlemen, Dean Sniffen has given us much to think about, and I am sure his presentation this evening will generate a healthy discussion, both as we continue through the evening and beyond. There are two respondents this evening. The first being the Reverend Dr. Cicely Athill Horsford, the chairman of the Barbados Christian Council, who now joins us online. I am getting a signal that we don't have her presentation this evening, so just yet. So we will move on to the second respondent, and he's sitting right here in the front row, the Honorable Corey A. Lane, the Minister of State in the Office of the Attorney General and the representative for our capital city, Bridgetown. Minister.
Good evening to all. Protocol having been established, re-established, and enforced. I really want to start my response by really saying that it is truly an honor to be here this evening. And it's something you usually say at the beginning, but I have a lot of obligations that I attend to. But sitting there this evening has really been not an obligation, but an honor. So I want to thank you very much. The very Reverend Dean Sniffen. From the time we started this evening with you, Ms. Clark, and I listened about the city and the possibility and the vision for the city, it was almost like Ms. Clark was writing a manifesto for me. And she ended with my favorite thing, my favorite word, action. That was the last word you said. And that is what I have been about for many years. And I have the privilege, the honor to be a servant of the city of Bridgetown now, to bring those actions, desires, and that manifesto to pass. So I know we started on the right foot. And then we went on with you, Reverend. And you spoke and you put the icing on the cake when you help each and every one of us to remember and to reinforce faith and works, faith and action. And for me, that is very powerful at this time and this season in my life, in all that I've been called to do. All my life working as a public servant, a servant of the people, and working particularly with city, inner city youth, at-risk youth. I've always said, and I've always encouraged the church and many other organizations to look and to understand that we must not treat to the symptom, but we must treat to the cause. And I've always painted the social picture of the tree for us to understand that crime, violence, all of these things are fruit of a very negative tree. And in order to uproot a negative tree, We must treat to the root of the problem. And for years, I painted that picture and I took that approach. It is only recently that I recognize now that we have to go even deeper. And what is deeper than the root? The seed. And what is the seed? The seed is the spirituality. The seed is the spirit. I've been speaking to a lot of reformed youth recently, and they said to me, many mentors, parents, so on, spoke to them for many years. And the reason that they could not hear and translate into action what was being said is because they were in darkness. How did they get back to light? They returned from whence they came, what they were trained up in. And that's one of my concerns. I say to the city and the church and the city and across Barbados is that one of my fears that we all lament that many young people don't go to Sunday school now. But when I talk to a lot of the OGs, what's called the old gangsters that reform, they went back to their training through secondary school, through Sunday school, through grandparents. But if they do not have that upbringing, what do they return to? And I ask us, as we consider the spirituality of the city, that we consider that we must double and triple our efforts to ensure that we remain steadfast, that our young people are rooted, and that our city has a good spirituality. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Minister. Do we have Dr. Athill Horsford? No, we don't. Okay, so we're going to move on to the question and answer session and the discussion part of this evening. And we're going to invite you, members of the audience, to ask questions, make comments, and let's have a lively discussion and take advantage of the fact that we have both Dean Sniffen and Minister Lane and other members here who can, who will interact with you. So, ladies and gentlemen, we'll turn it over to questions and answers. Don't all rush forward at once. It just takes one to get things going.
I'm just here to man the mic. Anyone?
Here's one in the front.
Good night. It's good to have a woman open the baton, right? So, okay, let's go. Good evening again, all. My question is for Dean Sniffen. First, thanks very much for, a very thought-provoking, I was making my notes, a very thought-provoking lecture. As you said, I mean, you have good intentions. And I think the church is not devoid of good intention. So as you said, you do things and you think, well, okay, we do this drive, we got the deacons covered, we got COVID, we put, we responded to human need. And I mean, it's there. It's not that you're doing something that isn't useful, but the next step in terms of doing things in a, I guess I would say, a transformative and sustainable way that empowers people to not be in need for a long time. So yes, you have to respond to the need, but also be taking things forward so that more need is not generated in the future, or that need is reduced. From your presentation, the impression that I got was that, sometimes you struggle to think about what to do, how to do it, and that you need to tap into people themselves to sort and allow the Spirit to move to reveal that to you. My question is, I mean, you use the example of the young people that you interacted with, the Occupy Wall Street movement and stuff. I guess what I'm struggling with is in a context where, to some extent, the starting point sometimes is a space of not having very much of connection with the, I'm going to say the beneficiaries or the people that you want to reach. Let me say the people we want to reach. How do you make that connection or create that space that allows you to draw and learn from them, and that you can explore together what you could meaningfully do to make a difference? Because, you know, there's no Occupy Broad Street going on down for us, but if we take what you've said today as an inspiration that we need to reach out, and how will you do it, especially if you're starting from a space when you're not necessarily as connected maybe to the community as you would perhaps like to be, certainly not as connected to some of the core people you might want to reach?
Thank you both for that comment and very rich question. And I think it's right in the sweet spot of where we as the church often get stuck in our discernment, that our discernment sometimes is limited by what we think are realistic projects or programs that we can take on and run. And I think what I'm proposing, especially with regard to a spirituality that we might learn from the city, is that our ministries, if we want them to really be effective in bringing about transformative change, need to be primarily relational rather than programmatic. So it's not about discrete or distinct things that the church does. It's the very way in which the church relates to the whole community. And what I would share with you by way of encouragement, that if anyone feels like, well, I don't have the relationships I need to get those things done, then that is the work, right? To build those relationships. And as someone who was completely new to New York City and completely new to urban life, I met those people little by little and one by one, buying my groceries, talking to neighbors on the sidewalk, asking parishioners to introduce me to people they knew who might get me a meeting with so-and-so. And it was little by little and one by one. The floodgates opening, the reason I use the kind of dramatic story of what happened in the aftermath of Sandy is it was that web of relationships which we became committed to building as a congregation that then allowed us to open the door for that movement to fill our sacred space. If we hadn't been focused on building those relationships, we wouldn't have known even who to ask. So it's not a story of self-congratulations that we were doing the right thing. It happened for me by accident. It wasn't strategic. I didn't know what I was doing. It was just in the course of meeting the people of the city that I discovered that they were teaching me how to be a priest in that place.
There's a question, over here.
Good evening, everyone. Lisa Jessamy Maynard, a seminarian at Cathedral College. Only this afternoon earlier, we had a similar discussion and the principal spoke, and I reflect on the fact that I had a short stint at St. Leonard's Church in the city, and I was grateful for the opportunity to see how they relate to the people in the neighborhood. But what I noticed was that the people that make up the parish, the congregation, were not living in the city. The priest does not live in the city. So we're a case for you, hands-on, you were actually in it and were able to feel the pulse of the people. In our context, there's a big difference. So how do we get to that point by living outside of the city when we're only spending one day, Sunday, for a few hours? Thank you.
So thank you very much. Just so I make sure I understand your question. So it's that the congregation resident in that church does not reside in that community. They commute to church from elsewhere. Okay. So This is, in our context, we have similar things. We often make a joke about it. It's that you have to pass two Episcopal churches to get to the Episcopal church that you attend. I don't know if that happens in Barbados, that people, oh, lo and behold, another communion connection. So there are two things. That is a real challenge, right? Because as Anglicans, we have this understanding of the church in the community and of the community. So the idea is those who worship together in this place are the people of that place and making decisions for the resacralization of that place. And so when these things happen these usually happen over time. Probably the families that attended that parish moved for certain reasons, demographic shifts, economic shifts, whatever it is, but they're still connected to that sacred building. They might be clinging to it in certain ways, and they come back there to worship. One way that I would say, a possible way to engage that in moving forward is not to say those people should be told by their clergy, go to the parish close to where you live. We try that, it doesn't work. If that's where they're praying, to say that, look, as Anglicans, this sense of community cohesion that we're meant to participate in as people who pray in a particular place means that if we're going to worship here, we have to develop a love of this neighborhood and this urban setting and be in ministry in this place, even if we live in a village several miles away, right? And beginning a conversation, perhaps with Bible study, with prayer, with conversation, that if this is going to be our church in this community, then we can't just be a church in this community. We have to become a church of this community, even if it's not where we reside. Do we understand the needs of this place where our church building is? Do we know who lives around this building? Who are they? What are they passionate about? How could we come alongside them in solidarity? Those are the faithful questions that need to be asked by that congregation. And so I think a big burden of that is on pastoral leadership, encouraging and fostering and equipping the congregation to have those conversations, but it's not easy. I would say that I think this is a challenge that we share in our contexts. We also have a number of parishes in our diocese where almost everyone who works in a particular church lives somewhere else, and they just commute in, they pray, they eat, and they depart. There are other responses I would actually love to hear too in this. Other folks involved in faith and action, or just who are attending the lecture, do you have other ideas about this? But it shouldn't be ignored is the thing I would say. In our context, if the congregation has enough money to continue in that disengaged way, it's usually allowed to continue. And that gets in the way of the pastoral development.
Any additional questions? See someone here.
A very good evening to all. I was thoroughly enthused, excited as I listened. I sat and listened to you, Dean Sniffen. My name is Irma Ambrose. I happen to be a city minister right on Bay Street. When you had Bayfield feet, I'd say, yeah, Bay Street, that's the right place for you to be. And I also happen to be the second chair of the Christian Council. Not that that means anything right now. So basically what I'm saying is that the church, Christianity, which you identified, has been hostile to city life, really, from inception. Jerusalem killing its prophets is something that we as a people need to start relearning. When I say relearning, we have to think it differently. And you are so right in terms of trying to fix people. And I think all of our churches, all of our religious organizations need to be on this same footing in terms of interacting with all persons, especially those in the city, because I grew up in a country church, big space. You would never imagine the things that happen there. And so when you are in a wide space, For example, you can have a harvest because there's the fruits, and then you, because of your mindset, you are now taken from the large space before the greenery and in the small space in the city, and you want to have a harvest. It's not really the same thing, but you only learn that once you try it, and then you keep at it and say it doesn't work. So when we meet people, and I believe that this is the movement that all persons need to be getting into so that we can transform life, is that we truly find out what people need. And city ministry for me is very real in its sense, because I still commute, but in the city, then there are schools and there are hospitals, and these are people who are all tied together. And it's amazing, as individuals, I say to myself, I do not know how people live in such space. When I get a house, I want a space that, so that I could hold a heart. The canned ground is what I'm accustomed to, but that is not always the reality. And so we have to do a lot of transforming of the mind. How is that possible? How can we actually help persons, and especially congregants, move to the point where we are at the level where we don't just help, where we don't just pick up things. And I'll just give you another, for instance. On Friday evening, I drove into the churchyard to Stations of the Cross. I was 5 minutes before it was supposed to begin, but then there was a guy coming and he was flagging me down in the churchyard, but I was also gonna stop because I had not seen him for quite a long time. And he used to come on Sundays to get something. So it was, and he said, Rev, I said, what become of you? And he goes like, man, they take me up and had me in the mental, man. They said I'm mad. And I started to laugh. He said, Rev, you're laughing at me. But I said, I'm not laughing with you. But I was so amazed that immediately we actually connected. He wasn't the beggar anymore. We were like friends. And I don't know if he realized it, but I certainly realized it afterwards. And I connected with him differently because I stopped because I had missed him. He said, yeah, they give me all these injections and so on. And now I'm still sore. And I'm like, I said, but you look well. And he felt so good about that. That is the kind of connection that I think that people in the world, especially people who live in the city and commute, because they're real people. So how do we actually help transform the minds of persons who grew up in the city and move out the city and still try to fix people? How do we do that and try to help people realize they don't need to be fixed? They just need to be cared for and acknowledged as real people. How does that work? How do we get there?
Well, I think the seeds of the answer were in your question and comment. It's that we need to return to our core theology, that we encounter Christ primarily in one another, that we're bearers of the Christ light to one another, and that people are not projects, and people don't want to be fixed, they want to be known. Right? And that we should have the expectation that whenever we encounter another human being, we are encountering Christ himself. And so that's right at the heart and core of who we are as Christians. And I think it's something that the city can be a great educational context for that, because it's hard to avoid people in the city, right? You have to share sidewalks, you have to share space, and we can cultivate that as understanding that our whole life is that sort of prayer, rather than fearing what we don't know about other people. I see this in my city all the time around mental illness, right? That sometimes people are visibly agitated in a way that we want to avoid them completely, cross to the other side of the road, etc. And how that feels over time for their humanity, that they're someone to be avoided, like a leper in the Gospels, ringing their bell. We're, I think, to remind one another that we don't need to avoid each other because we don't know each other or we find each other too complex to deal with, but rather that by being committed to encounter, we'll discover something more of Christ's presence in ourselves and in the other person.
Good evening, Michael Clark. Thank you very much, Dean, for your presentation. And as we've been conversing all week long in this general area, it's interesting that we continue to recognize, hopefully, some very fundamental aspects of this inherited tradition of ours. You from a WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant context, and ours from the colonial church mindset. And as we were sharing, I remembered an experience that I would have had visiting the Diocese of Illinois, Springfield, Illinois, where there was this city community church, basically, and it was a Black community. And over time, the members got frustrated because people kept breaking into the church and stealing just nuisance things. And so the Black community decided that they were going to move out from that church and they're going to buy a church in a nicer part of the town. And so they did. They moved out and they got a church in another part of the city. And the bishop decided that he was going to appoint a community officer for the area. And this was a Black guy, and he was a former football star. So he was ordained and he was sent to that church as a community center. And his task was not to keep any kind of worship in this building, simply do community-based things. In 2 years' time, he called the bishop because he had a confirmation class of 40 persons. But the church had moved out. And it speaks volumes to how we have understood church through the years. Because what that guy was doing wasn't supposed to be church. It was supposed to be walking with the community. And I think there's a reality that our inherited church seems to have missed that significantly.
Thank you, Principal Clark. I agree. We've been having some very rich conversations up the hill, and it's wonderful to see some of your seminarians here too. One of the things that has been very rich about these last few days at Codrington is, even though we're from around this whole province and also from the US, our diversity is real and the differences of our context are real, and yet there are so many commonalities to the challenges. And I think it's by returning to this kind of Christ consciousness at the center of our received tradition and being focused on our right relationships with one another in community that gets us to the solutions that we need. But we're often more focused on fixing problems than being curious about new opportunities. And that fear, I think, binds us. So I hope that's part of what we take away together. I would say that, again, looking to the spirituality of the city as teacher, cities teach us that our unity is in our diversity rather than uniformity or erasure of difference, because cities are themselves essentially diverse, because people come from all over and commerce is there and governance is there, et cetera. And, without getting too esoteric in my theology, we remember that as Trinitarians, we believe that God is internally diverse, that God is irreducibly diverse and a community. So there's so much there in the received tradition, if we'll only allow ourselves to have that curiosity as our energy rather than a fear-based energy that causes us to retreat.
Any other questions? Ms. Clark.
This actually a question for Minister Lane. Yeah, so just reflecting on the thinking that we've had and the discussion that we've had. My question is, where do you see the space for the church in the work that the government is doing, or even you as a representative are doing in supporting the people of the city and developing Bridgetown? Where are the spaces or where are the opportunities that you would welcome the church's input or action or thought?
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Because it may give me the opportunity to say some other things that were rested on my heart in terms of answering the question. I've actually had the opportunity to sit with a lot of the management arrangements with the different types of churches over the years when they sought out my presence to answer some of the questions being answered here today in terms of how to work with youth, how to reach the at-risk youth and so on. And I must admit, even listening here, back then I had a similar philosophy where we go in and fix a problem. There's something that the dean keeps saying. I don't know if he even understands the depth of it or recognize it, because this was taught to me even in my work in prison and so on. One of the main things that I feel that I must say here right now is, in terms of reaching people, there's some key things that have worked for me that I believe can work for all of us. And that is, number one, humbling yourself. Number two, taking away the judgmental nature of it. It pushes people more aware. And then number three is to get that connection. I think that is so critical. And the reason I'm saying that, to answer your question and to connect the dots, is that it's very difficult for the church or anybody to work with anyone if there's those barriers existing where they feel as though they're being judged. And there is nothing more over the last 20 weeks that has driven this home for me in my latest portfolio dealing with prevention. Now, usually when I'm at these sessions, I accustom getting down to brass tacks and saying what on my heart, right? But now in the new dispensation, when I talk, it's pop up all kind of places. I don't know if it's in media or if it's recorded, right? But I can't do anything different but to speak from my heart. There's a humongous wedge between one segment of society and the other segment of society, because we got up barriers. A lot of those barriers start with being judgmental. That's where the barriers originate from. And those barriers create fear, and it creates a lot of different things that stops us from being able to work with each other. What am I talking about? I've had the responsibility over the years of working with certain gatekeepers in the country, and more so at the at-risk level. Recently, I've had to do it at the high-risk level. And there's a fear of those persons because there's an ignorance of what those persons are about, what they do. It's very cultural. We're still very conservative. Now, you talk about being arrested. I don't know if the bishop or the dean will correct me, but if any of them are arrested, I don't think they will go back. If you're like, but it'd be very different, right? So,
As I said, context is everything.
yes. That is my feeling. But I say that, and the reason why I say this is this: in working with them, with some of the gatekeepers, they want to do well. Some of them want to do legitimate things. When I'm working with the other parts of the society, there's like them, they can have a spelling name, then just vote. And so there's this definite huge divide. And I think that we've lost the art of how to connect with people, how to touch. And it was before COVID, how to touch people, what I found even in our programs as a government or as a society, we would do a lot of broadcasts. So we would do the billboards, we do the bus stops, we do the ads and so on, because we've lost that art of being able to connect. There's a serious barrier. And I think that the space, I don't ever think it should be space for church or other people or so on. I believe we should all be one common unity called community. And that all that we've said here today, it should not just be about projects, it be about people. So we humble ourselves. You know, sometimes we do the open air And you figure that somebody take a track and so on, even that connect there, there's that fear, that barrier. So my whole thing is the space for the church is looking at all the issues that we face and to get to the root of it, which are the things like the parenting and being able to help with all the needs of the persons, but ultimately going to what I talked about, going to the seed and bringing back the spirituality of our people, helping them to understand themselves. Because like what you did with the Occupy, you were the light that brought those persons to Christ. And you talk the example that was just given with the 40 people for confirmation card, that's the light. There are over 4,000 religions in the world right now, and Islam being one of the fastest growing ones because they've dropped that judgmental thing a lot. And what they do is say, look, get the light by getting one prayer. Don't start with the 5. You know they do 5 prayers. Just start with 1. And they kind of work in a way to break down the barrier. What I'm saying to the church in Barbados, for the city and across, because I see us as one family at the end of the day, urban or rural, is to take that approach where this person, as you said, the light of Christ, you're Christ, and not to carry that fear. And I can leave you with one example of why I feel so passionate about why I'm saying what I'm saying. I have an organization, Nature Farm Ranch, and a lot of those guys were, at-risk guys, and, some of them have been in trouble with the law, and some of them are about to be in trouble with the law before we get to them and try to get them away from that life of crime. And my wife, she works with them, and a lot of her friends from like university and so on, she'll be like, how you be around them? You don't be frightened, you don't be scared. And it's that vision, right? And I can't see it because I work with them so much, right? So the other day I was at the beach with my family, and I see like this big set of rowdy people coming. And then for the first time in a long time, I started to see what people is thinking, because I got my children now, 5 and 7. I said, I want these rowdy people around my children, judgmental again. And then when I look closer, some of them were my ranchers from my own youth group. What I mean? So it's like, that was a start reminder to me, and it gives me an opportunity to be a reminder to you. Like, just treat people as people. Humble yourself, drop the judgmental thing, just be, you know what I mean? And start to connect with people again. And I believe that that's the real work of the church, and all the other things will fall into place. Thank you.
We have a question in the back. Oh,
Can I just, as you carry the microphone, I just want to say an aspect of what you said that I really resonate with, and I think is something for the church always to be contemplating, is for those who we seek to be in relationship with and we seek to reach, we need to remember that even though we believe that our default posture is love and acceptance, that many people's experience is that the default posture of the church is judgment, and that they feel judged, and they're nervous about encountering people of faith. So it's just a reminder to us, something that many clergy in all sorts of pastoral work know, that the ministry is 90% listening. That if we spend the bulk of our time really listening to people, hearing their stories, come to understand who they are, they will usually speak the very wisdom they need to hear themselves, and will therefore take it on board much more powerfully than if we ever gave them advice. But also that there is nothing, we all know this in our own lives, there is nothing more powerful than being really heard and really seen by another human being. Being acknowledged for who we really are. And so when that is our focus in ministry, that kind of relationality, we progress in ways that we never could have imagined. Our ministry goes in directions we never would have imagined if we sat down to make a plan.
Thank you, Dean.
Thank you, Dean, for that exciting and enlightening vision. Someone had messaged me and asked, would like you to clarify or repeat. You mentioned something about charity solidarity. We would like to hear more of that. But I have 2 other matters that I think I could bring to you and ask you perhaps a comment. I'd really like your reference to relationships. I think ministry in the city really is about relationships, where we drive in. But if we have the relationship with the people who live in the city, I know that you discover how the loving the people in the city are. That has been my experience. I've been ministering in the city for almost 30 years. And one of the eye-opening experiences for me in my early days in the city was when someone approached me and said, Pastor, because they don't call you Reverend and so on. Pastor, when you drive through here, don't drive through with your windows up. And that has really been the message that I got in my very early days in the city. Because they want to see you, they want to talk to you, so I could walk through the city. And my experience was such that some of the people some of the parishioners thought that I should fear were the ones who came and defended me and protected the church where I served. They didn't fit the image, and they had some nicknames that were probably raise our heads. But those are the ones who were still calling me. And I remember there was one who, I was out of the island on some occasion, and the person was in prison, and the first person prison call was me. And it was out of a relationship, and they will still have that relationship. May not be in church anytime, but there's that relationship. So perhaps you can share a bit more. And the third one is that I would like you to say a bit about the ecumenical presence. Because I think though we are speaking primarily as Anglicans, because the center is an Anglican center, I'm of the view that really the work of the Spirit really relies a lot upon the collaborative effort of believers. And I see the need for greater solidarity with other churches, with other faiths, because we are all serving the same people. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Gibson. To the point about relationship, there's an adage in the United States about parenting. It's really an equation. And the equation is this: rules without relationship equals rebellion. And I don't know if that's something that's known in Barbados. Rules without relationship equals rebellion. And so that's sometimes, I think, an equation that the church knows well. And that's people perceive us to be a kind of rule-bound people who are not concerned to know them, but are concerned to tell them how to live. But when we invert that and say, no, our primary concern is to know you, because we believe you carry a part of the icon of Christ, who we know as God. And our image of God will be enlarged by knowing you. And then we'll talk about the covenants that we make together as holy communities to live in right relationship and the ways that manifests itself. But it needs to start with relationship, in my opinion, before it ever goes to rules. The charity solidarity question, I'd love to respond to. So, because these are difficult words to use, because of course charity in many of the translations we used to use in worship simply means love, right? Live in charity with your neighbor. But I'm talking more about like charitable works, charitable organizations, and charity drives, etc. These things are essential to respond to the immediate needs of our neighbors. Someone who's hungry needs a sandwich or a fish right now, right? Before we can get to solidarity or justice. But the shift that I focus on quite a bit in our ministry on Long Island is moving from a focus on charity to a focus on solidarity. That is, being in relationship in a manner that leads towards structural reforms that create greater justice in the community. That it's a sense of, you've probably heard the story of, there are bodies floating in the river. And so as each body comes by, the people see it as their work to take the body out and lovingly prepare the body for burial and take it to the churchyard. But it doesn't occur to anybody to go and move upriver and see who's killing people and throwing their bodies in the river. This to me is the shift from charity to solidarity. It's not that someone doesn't need to lovingly care for those bodies that are floating. We must always do that. But our goal, if we are a people following Jesus into this way of love, this sense of creating beloved community where everyone has what they need, we also need to be attending to those structural reforms in the very nature of our communities that will diminish the level of injustice in the future. So that's what I mean about charity and solidarity. And then in terms of ecumenical presence, yes, that's another great gift of the city, is that cities are places where ecumenism and interfaith community is it's just a given. That diversity just exists in urban areas, but it needs to be engaged intentionally. And I think there are lots of ways to begin by experiencing each other's prayer life and ritual life, by sharing in community meals and talking about what happens for each of our traditions at different occasions of the year when festivals come up. You know, what is our understanding of what's going on in that tradition? What are the corollary understandings in our own tradition, and that kind of sharing? And then, of course, in many ancient cities of the world, these are the places that we turn to look for what it means to live with those very significant, profound diversities that often lead to violence. And Jerusalem, I think, would be a chief example among them. I happened to find myself in Jerusalem one year when Eastern and Western Holy Week happened to be the same week. And it was also Passover, and it was also Muhammad's birthday that particular year. And so all of these faith traditions trying to inhabit the same urban landscape, surrounded by people with automatic weapons and barriers. So the tensions were high. But how do you, in that sort of a pressure cooker, understand what it means to live with diversity, not in denial of it? And I think cities have a way of teaching us how to do that over time, both by the ways that they inhabit it positively and by their mistakes. So I hope I've responded in some way to each of your three questions.
Thank you. We had one more question at the back. No, not. Okay, thank you. Any others, ladies and gentlemen?
Thank you. I have been contemplating, since you spoke, Dean Sniffen, about how do we really generate high stakeholder engagement for our activities as a charity such as we are, because we need resources to do a lot of what we do. And for the same reason that the church struggles because people come to worship and go home, we have the situation where the city is full of businesses, but the staff, the leaders of those businesses come to work and go home. So they may not necessarily feel that connection with the city or the need to address the issues of the city. It's easy for us to engage with the schools. We do that through World Water Day, World Peace Day. We get the programs going. But in terms of, we have developed a very successful feeding ministry and ministry to the street people through the center. And I find it strange that every year after we've done another successful feeding, we get calls from individuals saying, oh, that is something great that you all are doing. How can we be involved? But I'm still waiting for the calls from the businesses that, you know, that's really important. We would like to be a part of that. We'd like to support.
Thank you. I don't know if my response will be as helpful as it could be because of the contextual differences of different cities and how people tend to organize. But I would say that I think a big part of that challenge in my context about developing these very involved stakeholders is that there's been a fundamental breakdown in community cohesion in a lot of these communities. And because of the manner in which technology continues to progress, we've lost a sense of being able to listen to one another and get excited about moving our community forward. You know, I said to a young person in my life recently that I was trying to have a conversation with while they were scrolling on their phone, which is something I'm guilty of also. But I said, you know, I'm here and I would love to respond to what's going on in your life. TikTok is not going to respond, you know, to what's going on in your life. But I think we need to think about this too, that I think there's not, I wish there were, we probably all do. We wish that there were shortcuts to getting to this perceived promised land that we hope for our organization, where people will understand the benefit of what we are doing, that they will participate in it fully and generously, et cetera. But there doesn't seem to be any shortcut that moves faster than building these relationships one by one. And sometimes it's the most unlikely person that you engage in your work who will know just the right person to ask next. That's never a sure thing or a promised thing. It doesn't always happen. But what we know is it can only happen if we commit to building these relationships one by one in community to discover the deeper purpose God might have for having created this very work in the first place.
Thank you very much. And if there are no more questions or comments, we are going to invite Dean Sniffen to offer some concluding remarks.
Thank you. Well, perhaps it's all been said. I really value this conversation that we're having, and I hope it's a conversation that we have the benefit of continuing to participate in between our two islands, our two dioceses and provinces and cathedrals. It really is, to me, a very rich aspect of what it means to be a church connected in the way that we are, that we've been able to share in these conversations at Codrington, share in worship at the cathedral, and share in this conversation tonight about cities that we love and how to be the people of faith God has called us to be in these places. So I just wish to express my gratitude again to Bishop Michael, to Dean Jeffrey, and to Principal Michael for being brothers on the road and in this ministry together. And I'm just very grateful to have been invited and to be a part of this conversation.
Thank you again. Ladies and gentlemen, an event of this nature takes a concerted effort by quite a few people to pull it off. So to move the vote of thanks to those involved, we are going to invite to the podium Mr. Hadford Howell, who is a trustee of the center.
Thank you. Good night to all. Specially invited guests, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure and privilege on behalf of the St. Michael Center for Faith and Action to move the vote of thanks at this 5th annual Dean's Lecture. I hope and pray that you have enjoyed your evening with us so far, but it's not yet done. I endeavor not to leave anyone out who deserves a mention, but in case I do, I beg their forgiveness in advance, for it is not intentional. To the Reverend Sandra Hazel, SMCFA trustee, for delivering the opening prayers to get tonight's proceedings underway by invoking God's blessing on our event. It is always an appropriate action to have taken, and is something we should do more of more regularly before we set out on any venture. So we say thank you, Reverend Sandra. If you know Miss Sherry Ann Clark, another SMCFA trustee, you will be aware that she is a charming lady. She demonstrated that attribute tonight in the way she warmly welcomed all of us. So we say thank you, Sherry Ann. It is fitting that our SMCFA chairman, Dr. Jeffrey Gibson, delivered preliminary remarks on and about the work of the SMCFA. As one dean to another, same rank, working in city environment, but in different countries, the ongoing sharing of information and differing experiences can attest to the body and growth of the work being done, not only by the SMCFA, but your agency, often in collaboration with other entities, both local and overseas. As trustees, we share the Dean's enthusiasm for the projects that we are continuing to undertake. So thank you, Dean Jeffrey. We appreciated Ms. Ella Hoyes, another trustee, whose excellent introduction to our lecturer was quite phenomenal. Elegantly and precise as usual, she set us to anticipate an interesting, exciting, and insightful presentation. If her task was to set the bar high for Dean Sniffen, she surely succeeded. So therefore we say, thank you, Ella. To our lecturer, who had the title, The Spirituality of the City, to deal with. It probably meant different things to each of us. Which direction would he take? What would we expect? Well, I can say, sir, that you comfortably jumped over that bar that was set for you by Ella, and you provided an excellent, articulate, reasoned, and example-filled presentation tonight, which I am sure has given us, especially our minister here, some food for thought and some actions perhaps to follow. Hopefully from the ideas shared and exchanged, our future Bridgetown experience may become a different and wonderful one, both in the day and at night. I suspect you may venture to visit this lecture online in due course to draw on some of the suggestions that were offered, not only from Dean Sniffen, but in the exchanges that followed. So we thank you, Dean Sniffen, for sharing your insights. We wish you and those visiting with you a safe onward journey back home. We hope that to offer you some hospitality while you're here, and we look forward to welcoming you back to our island in the not too distant future. So thank you. It is good that tonight's respondents, I don't know if we actually, I don't think we heard from Reverend Cicely, but certainly we heard from the Honorable Corey Lane, Member of Parliament for the City of Bridgetown, who seemed to be rather excited not only to be here, but to have picked up several ideas that he may be able to implement in the next few, dare I say, weeks, months, and years. Who knows, out of what he's picked up might come some novel innovations and or developments that benefit the city of Bridgetown, as learning from each other is usually a positive thing. And so we thank Minister Lane for your contribution. We acknowledge you, our audience, those of you who are present, who've signed in online, and also those who've engaged in the stimulating question and answer session, which has followed the lecture. Without you, tonight's event would not have been possible, let alone successful. I hope you all took lots of notes. There's a lot of sharing and caring that needs to be done. So we therefore thank all of you for engaging with the SMCFA this evening. To our wonderful Master of Ceremonies, our hostess, Ms. Deborah King, for readily agreeing to our request to MC tonight's event, and for so graciously shepherding us through the various stages of tonight's program. Job well done. Thank you, Ms. King. Now, where would we be without a venue, technology, and refreshments? We're therefore grateful to the staff of the Central Bank of Barbados, and in particular, the Courtney Blackman Grand Salle, Mr. David Springer and his team, and to another trustee, Reverend Stephanie Ann Wedderburn. Such persons are seldom visible because they're working very hard behind the scenes, always to ensure that we all have an enjoyable experience. Because of such persons, our evening, which is still not yet concluded, has been wonderful to date. So on your behalf, our audience, I say a sincere thanks to them all. Now, I have been asked by my colleagues to invite Bishop Michael to give us the benediction. So Bishop Michael, thank you.
Let us pray. Eternal God, as we continue to be conscious of your presence in our lives and in our world, and even as you have given us this opportunity this night to be mindful of your word through one of your servants who reminds us that faith without works is dead. And even our call to be mindful that building relationships with each other is also very important, as you would have, of course, sent your Son, Jesus Christ, to connect with us, to be among us, to work with us. And so we thank you to God for reminding us even this night through the Dean of what you may be very well calling us to move forward, particularly within the ministry offered by our Cathedral Church and other churches within the city of this urban ministry to which you are calling us. So we thank you for speaking to us through your servant. We thank you for the engagement of all that we have received and offered this night. May we continue, to God, to always be mindful that we are your servants as we serve each other and as we relate with each other. And as this part of our evening together comes to a close, and as we may seek to offer and engage in further fellowship, we even seek your blessing upon us now as we leave this particular environment. So may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious unto you. May the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you his peace, now and forevermore. Amen. God bless.
And thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. We now invite you to share some refreshments with us in the foyer. And when you eventually make your way home, whether it be here in Barbados or back to the US, we hope you do so safely. And thank you very much for joining us both in person and online. I bid you a good evening. Thank you.